Hi there. Thanks for tuning in to Tinnitist TV. You know, for my money, Eamon McGrath is the greatest Canadian artist that you've never heard. But hey, there's always hope. Specifically, Bells of Hope, the prolific troubadour and producer's umpteenth release. It's the latest chapter in a loose musical trilogy that began with his pivotal 2018 album Tantramar and its 2019 follow-up Guts, both of which found McGrath moving beyond the guitar-based roots and punk of his youth into richer and more rewarding experimental electronic territory. Bells of Hope pushes this envelope even further with its poetic lyrics, innovative songcraft, and distinctively striking production. You put all those elements together, and you have one of the smartest, sharpest, and strongest indie releases of this year. Go listen to it. You won't be disappointed, I promise. But first, watch McGrath and I talk about his career, his creative process, his other unheralded gig as a novelist, and plenty more besides. Hope you like it. Well, Eamon McGrath, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. It's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. I've been an avid reader of Tinnitist for years, so it's cool.
You're very kind. I would like to tell you that I've been listening to your music since you started, but that would be a lie. I discovered you about 4 or 5 years ago. I think Tantramar was probably my first exposure, and
probably that's a good starting point.
Yeah, why?
Well, my career, I guess, up until this point, has kind of been divided into two sort of pretty distinct eras, you might say. It was like I started touring and recording when I was really young. Like I was touring. Well, I mean, I started playing guitar when I was 9. I was in my first band by the time I was 11, and I was touring the United States illegally on many levels of illegality when I was about 17 or 18.
No kidding.
Not only did I not have a visa, and I was going there and playing shows, but I was also not 21, so I wasn't even supposed to be in any of the bars I was playing. I still to this day don't know how I quite pulled all that shit off, but
did you never get carded or caught? Or
well, we just had lots the bass player in the band that I was touring with, I would just use his ID, and for some reason they never, I don't know, read the name on the ID or something. It blows my mind. It's like it's my name on the poster, and that's not what it says on the ID I just showed you. Not to mention the fact that the guy who's like
with your stage name or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, and then not to mention the fact that the ID, the guy that the ID belongs to just showed you his, and anyway, whatever.
Well,
yeah, so that was like what in my when I was really young, like 17, 18, I was doing that, and that kind of opened the chapter of quite a long period of time with a record label called White Whale that I was signed to for 3 albums, and that was 13 Songs of Whiskey and like Peacemaker and Young Canadians. And so that was like pretty early stages of my career. And then the record Exile came out, which is sort of like a bit of a line in the sand and between the White Whale days and what I would call this current incarnation of what I do. Mm-hmm. And Tantramar came out after that album. Right. So Tantramar if you sort of like the trajectory that I'm currently on probably began with that album. That was like kind of me starting from scratch in a lot of ways.
And what prompted this pivotal sort of moment?
Well, I think that I just sort of made a more conscious effort to try and mature my sound after what was, comparatively speaking, a pretty long break from touring. Like in 2015, 2016, I was playing guitar for another band in Toronto called Dearly Beloved, and we made a record with Dave Catching of the Eagles of Death Metal, and I was doing a bunch of stuff for them and went to Europe a bunch. We opened for Swerve Driver in the States and in the UK, and I was just like totally a side guy, and that was kind of nice because it sort of distracted me from my own stuff, which I wasn't really happy with artistically at the time. And to be honest with you, I'd kind of sworn off of making music under my own name in general. I was pretty burnt out because for like a 21-year-old kid, that Young Canadians record that was like a pretty substantial stab at bringing it to a really wide international audience. There was a lot of shows in a very short time. And Tantramar was kind of the impetus for me exploring just like a new sort of sonic and artistic direction that wasn't so like punk rock related. I got kind of bored of just being like a shouty punk rocker guitar player
Sure.
guy. And I was getting like a lot of shows with, folk punk crossover artists like Chuck Reagan or something. Right. And I love Chuck Reagan. He's a great guy and really respect what he does. But I kind of never really felt like I connected with that community in the same way that I think people thought I did. And I was taking shows because they were good gigs to get. And I was playing huge, like I opened for Chuck in Eastern Canada a couple of years ago, and the shows were huge. They were great shows, really worth doing, but that's not what I do. And Tantramar was like a way that I could sort of reevaluate my approach to making records and try and, release something that was a bit more demonstrative of what I actually wanted to do. So
did the shift happen kind of naturally and easily, or was it a lot of work to sort of find your way from point A to point B,
Yeah, it took a lot of work. I mean, it was like very nerve-wracking in some ways because, the most affordable way to tour an album is to, like bass, drums, and guitar, to put a 3-piece punk rock band in a van and take it on tour. So I think that I'd maybe like shied away from trying to incorporate other sounds and directions in my records before Tantramar, because I was just kind of like nervous about bringing a song on the road that I couldn't maybe, accurately recreate live. And by the time Tantramar came out, I guess I just kind of stopped caring. I also was working a lot with this pedal steel player in Edmonton named Derek Anderson, and having someone who's that proficient at a lead instrument also opens up a lot more sonic territory for you. Like you can sort of recreate, what a synth line might have been on a record. You can do that with a pedal steel, So Derek did a lot of that stuff and ended up making the records, giving the records a lot of justice on tour.
Right. So
that opened up a lot of different avenues for me. And then also, I mean, like budgetary and time restrictions when you're in the studio has a huge impact on the music that you make, because you, if you've got like 8 days in the studio and you've got a window of time to finish something, whatever you put on the record is governed by how much you can afford and who you can afford to hire and who's in town and available and who's around and willing to play on it. But with Tantramar, I was the artist in residence for Sappy Fest that year. And it was like, I lived in Sackville for, almost 5 weeks, 6 weeks. So I had like all the time in the world. I had pretty much like everybody in town that was playing music was around, because it's August in the East Coast. It's like the most chill time. So, I mean, pretty much anyone in Sackville that was like, a working musician ended up playing on that album, or at least on what was a contender to go on the record. And then with this latest album, Bells of Hope, same kind of thing. It's like I recorded it all in 2020 during the first wave of first lockdown or whatever. So I was like, calling saxophone players in Saskatoon and just being like, here's 3 songs that I want to have horns on, get me the stems whenever you can. And sometimes it would take like, 3.5 weeks to get something back, but eventually it would show up, and that's what became the mixes of the record.
So were these songs written during lockdown too, or did they predate?
Yeah. I gave myself like when, because I mean, as I'm sure everybody remembers, when it all first started, we all thought that it was like going to be 6 inconvenient weeks,
Right.
And so when I got my first CERB deposits, I was pretty committed to sort of treating it like grant money, is how I thought of it. Cause I was like, well, I want to give myself some sort of motivator to keep working and to be busy. So I had a quota of a song a day, and I'd start from scratch. By the end of the day, it'd be written and recorded. And then, that started in late March of 2020. And by the second week of June, I had a full length record. I got the mix done by then. The master was ready. And then that was the first album that I made from isolation that we put into the production schedule at Saved by Vinyl. And here we are.
So this was all done remotely at home by
100% remotely at home. Yeah. By me and about 5 or 6 other people altogether. Not counting, like, there's a lot of people that are involved in, like, vocalists, like Julie Doiron sings on it. Misha Louis sings on it. Cormac Culkeen sings on it. But the core group of people that made the record, myself, Danny Miles plays in July Talk, my brother Brendan, and then Laurie, who mixed it, and Andy McGoffin, who mastered it. So that's only really like 5 people, that made the album. But all of us were never at any point in the same room together. It was all remote.
Like doing that, I mean, because obviously, you've written your own songs and made your own music for decades, but to do it, I mean, in such a cocoon,
It was totally different than anything I'd ever done. I mean, every record I've ever made, features in some capacity, it's like 2 people playing together, whether it's, me doing a scratch guitar track with a live drummer and then going and replacing everything over top of the drum tracks that person, whoever they are, finishes. Whereas this album was kind of like done the opposite way. It was like I would do a scratch track or something like that to a, or maybe have a really loose idea. I'd do it to a click track, send it to someone, they'd send an idea back to me, and then I'd write the song that way. I know Connor Ellinger too is the other guy that plays on the record a lot. He's my current touring drummer. So I would mostly I would map out a song, have a bunch of arrangements done to a grid, and then send them to Connor or Danny or whoever else wanted to be involved. And then that stuff was sort of all inserted later.
Wow. But still, is it still the same process? So in songwriting terms, in that it's an idea pops in your head and you pick up a guitar and work something out, or has it evolved and did it change because of this to where maybe it's, I don't know, you hear a beat or you have a sound, that you've got on a track somewhere that's inspiring you? I'm just kind of wondering where the chickens and eggs come from now for you in songwriting.
Yeah. I mean, every song kind of evolves in its own way. It's all a really unique experience depending on the kind of instrument you're writing on, or like who's around, or how bored you are with playing piano or guitar, or like maybe you get a new piece of audio equipment or a new effects pedal, and then all of a sudden that becomes this catalyst for discovering all these new sounds or ideas that you hadn't really heard before.
Has it always been that way, or is this?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of songs that I have that are, like the way you're describing, which is just like, oh, I need to write a song. And you put your ass in a chair and you grab an acoustic guitar and you write it, like as if like you're writing a story, the beginning, middle, and end. And then other things are kind of emerge out of maybe more abstract ideas, like a tape loop or something. Like on April, a song off Bells of Hope called April, which was a single that came out last spring. That whole song was written around a loop that I made of an orchestra tuning, and then we pitch shifted it to be in this key that we wanted to have this song written in, and then the entire arrangement was pretty much came out of just this like William Basinski style ambient loop. Like there's this whole, David Lynch has this whole really cool way of putting it where he talks about like fishing for an idea, is the way he talks about it. Like you can, like, it's pretty inspiring, because his whole thing is like, if there's always a remedy for writer's block, and I really believe that, like, there's always a way to expose yourself to something that you maybe never have heard before. Or like Ryan Adams had like this whole method where he would take like two piles of books, like, and open a random page on one and open a random page on the other, and then all of a sudden, those are like the first two lines of a new song. So there's all these little tiny things you can do that can maybe spark some inspiration, and in approaching a day of writing that way, there's really no consistent methodology for how that can happen, right? So
right.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, a lot of the stuff, like, sometimes you'll dig through voice memos on your phone and come up with something. Sometimes it'll be a quote that a friend says to you. Sometimes it'll be, like, you'll think of some show you played 4 years ago in Japan somewhere or something like that. It's all anything, the well runs pretty deep.
What's your batting average? Does everything end up working to completion, or do you like start something and then, oh, I got a better idea and this one gets abandoned and that one takes over?
I always try to see an idea through to the bitter end, and then it's a matter of just deciding what's worthy of making a record or not.
Right, but
I try not to
one at a time.
Yeah, and I try to focus on one song until it's sort of, until it's run its course, and then I just do a lot of pruning. But I'm generally more inclined to like work an idea till it's finished, and then just decide if it sucks or not on an overall level later. But I don't really believe in like working something to death, because I just think that your energy is probably better suited like.
If you're doing one a day, I mean, that's not a lot of time for
right.
second guessing, or, I mean, is that have you always worked that way? Have you always been?
I mean, I have a reputation for working pretty quickly in the studio. Yeah. And I totally like, Rush, for example, they would like work an idea to death. They would never say no to anyone's idea. And it's like, to me, that's a nightmare. And it's like the polar opposite of how I work. Like I definitely try to keep myself interested and motivated and inspired by having, like by working on music that I actually want to listen to. And if you're beating an idea to death, it gets to the point where you just resent it and you don't even want to hear it anymore.
Right.
And for me, it's totally counterintuitive and counterproductive for how you want to be approaching music, because you want to do it in a way that excites you, mm-hmm. and that makes you want to continue on. And I also have, I believe that the recording process is not just about audio, like microphones are recording something other than sound, in my opinion. They record, they're recording the energy and the emotion and the environment that's happening in the studio or wherever it is you're recording. They're documenting and archiving lots of different things other than just the sound that's being created by people. And so I try to harness that as much as I can and cut to wax elements of music that maybe aren't just, that aren't concerned with just hearing things and making a sound. There's more to music than that, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I wanted to ask you, excuse me, about the production on these songs, because, I mean, these aren't just, you put up the mics and you play your instrument and you capture the thing. These, to me, a lot of the songs on this album, they almost are like paintings. They've got layers and textures and all these elements that really are all of these like deliberate decisions you're making sonically in the moment, or are a lot of them happy accidents while you're putting something together?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, like, it's not really set up right now, but I could give you sort of a tour.
Local tour, sure.
Like, here, I have like,
right.
I mean, that stack of pedals over there is like the closest that I can get to outboard gear, and essentially I've got an interface that lets me take any sound that I've got stored in my computer, run it out to those effects pedals, and I can manipulate the sound in real time with those effects pedals, and then record it with the interface I've got. Mm-hmm. So, to answer your question, there's going to be this sort of inevitable sense of kind of reacting to whatever the pedal's doing,
right?
Or and so that's totally out of your hands. And a lot of the time you can capture some magic that way and then end up editing it, or and I really like working that way. I like sort of being like, I like having a recording also be capturing that sense of discovery, or archiving like the experience of an artist actually sort of uncovering something within a song that didn't exist 10 seconds before, So that's an example of how you can sort of make yourself susceptible to random acts of electricity
so you're actually, in a way, you're capturing the actual act of creation on a lot of these songs.
100%. Yeah, not just the sound, but you're capturing the means by which you created the sound and found it. Like the discovery and the kinetic energy and getting from point A to point B. Microphones are recording all of that too. And so I try to have that experience in my home studio too, as much as I can.
Kind of ironic in that, we were talking about taking these songs and playing them live, which would obviously be difficult because you can't recreate a lot of what you're doing, but essentially you're making live albums to some
100%. That's exactly the way that I think about recording. Yeah. You're recording the act of creation just as much as you're recording the sound that you've created, So yeah, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, the chances of me being able to pull together, hiring a 9-piece horn section to do Sarajevo that way live is probably slim, but in the quest to like find a way to represent that idea or texture appropriately, then you're not actually doing that much of a disservice to the record, because it's the same sort of frantic energy that goes into figuring out how to maybe recreate those horns with a synth or guitar or something as it did going into pulling that kind of a performance out of the person that played the saxophone.
Right. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you brought up Sarajevo, because I wanted to ask about that song. It seems like a real kind of outlier even for you, and a very arresting way to kick off the album. It's really, a very odd song. Can you tell me about the story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, sonically and musically, it just came out of being pretty much like obsessed with David Bowie and Alice Coltrane. I was listening to nothing but Station to Station and Journey and Satchidananda on like a ritualistic daily level when the pandemic first started. And I wanted to do something that was sort of like as freaky, or at least approaching as freaky as those two records. And lyrically speaking, I saw like kind of unfolding in front of me was what at the time felt like this unprecedented sort of breakdown of society. And I was living in the Junction in Toronto for when it all, went down. And typically, like generally speaking, that's a pretty sort of, I don't like, for lack of a better word, kind of a yuppie part of town. And I was kind of disgusted, at the way a lot of people were treating what I would describe as just kind of like inconvenient but necessary public health policies. Those were met with the same sort of fury as someone who, experienced like actual violent and horrible turmoil on a societal level, which was the siege of Sarajevo. I have a lot of Bosnian friends and Croatian friends, and I've spent a lot of time there touring, and it's like that's an unimaginable horror that, in my opinion, like what was asked of people here, you could never even come close to comparing those two things. And so that song was sort of a reaction at like, all the people that might think that they're somehow in the same league, which in my opinion, they're just totally not.
No, I hear you. Well, and it brings me to the title, because Bells of Hope seems a little, I don't know, this doesn't feel like a hopeful album.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
It's a pretty dark record.
It's a dark record for sure. And I mean, it was written during a really dark time, but I mean, it's kind of like, there's not really a point in continuing on if you don't try to at least, you know, strive for something better. And I think that the album at least tries to do that. It's like there's an optimism in the sense of you know, giving yourself a reason to get out of bed every day. And for me, that was because I knew that at the end of the day there was a song waiting for me. You know, that's what got me through it. It's also a reference to in cancer wards, when people in treatment, they get them to ring a bell of hope. And so a friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer in fall of 2019. And I found out when I was on tour in Spain. And that just became this like really incredible image. And so I sort of tried to apply that to what everybody else was going through, you know, on a metaphorical level.
So if you were doing a song a day, and I presume you're kind of just generally prolific and always creating stuff, how did you decide, okay, these 10 songs make an album, and it's not these 20 songs or 5 of these songs and 5 of those, you know what I mean? Were these the first 10 songs that came along, or were these 10 of 30 you wrote?
Pretty much, like, I mean, the way that I usually, like, I'm pretty utilitarian about those kind of decisions. There's only a certain length of time that you can put on an LP without sacrificing audio quality. So, you know, so I try to keep it, you know, between 15 and 20 minutes aside. That keeps the grooves wide. And
so you're very much thinking of vinyl when you do this.
Yeah, 100%, always, especially like just right from the start. Okay. And then also, I mean, like I've grown up in, I grew up in punk rock and going to hardcore shows, and I've seen, you know, tens of thousands of bands. And for me, like, the sweet spot for a live set is like, you know, 30 to 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So I think I've always tried to translate that sort of time frame or whatever into a record I put out. Like, for me, it's like, you know, when you get to the point musically where someone's going to get up and go to the bar and get another beer, that's when your record should probably end. Yeah. Is the way that I've sort of tried to conceive it. So usually I keep a record at 9 or 10 songs. And then all of those decisions are made just by total gut feelings. Like when I'm walking around listening to mixes, reviewing the game tape or whatever, if the first thing I want to do, you know, after the 10th time I've heard a song is skip it, then I just don't put it on the record.
So you're not precious about your own stuff
at all. I try not to be. Yeah.
Because
I'm not going to beat. I'd rather, for me, it just makes no sense to just, you know, beat a mix or a song or something to death when you could take that energy and apply it to the exploration of a new idea. Right. For me, that's the most efficient way of spending your time. So
how many songs have you thrown away over the years?
I mean, thousands, you know, and I'm, you know, I mean, they might end up on something someday, but if they don't, it's no sweat off my back either, right?
So you just have hard drives full of
yeah.
You got a box set in the making, I think, here somewhere, don't you?
I mean, it could happen someday if like money and time allow. I mean, I think that in the fall there's going to be like, we're going to try and put out a ton of the stuff that we've been recording, that I've been recording with people over the past 2 years, because aside from Bells of Hope, Bells of Hope was just kind of the first one, right, of many that ended up happening because this fucking lockdown's been so long. So there was a lot of time spent at home, a lot of time writing music, you know, and also a lot of people that were available and really wanted to play on it, because all of a sudden it's like, you know, the best musicians in the world were bored. So I took advantage of that.
And available. Yeah.
And available.
So how many albums are you ahead of yourself at this point?
There's about including records that I worked on with other people since spring of 2020, there's about 10 new records in the can. And someday they'll probably be released in some capacity, but maybe not. I mean, I don't know. It's like, I mean, I like all the sort of like important releases, they end up getting pressed to vinyl, and then they come out and I do a bunch of touring to support them, but I'm probably going to be touring anyway because it's my job.
Mhm.
So even that nowadays seems a little bit arbitrary. Like I send stuff I write and record, around to my friends, and we all think they're the shit, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it reminds me of Neil Young. This archive of stuff, and oh yeah, well, I made that album, but then I had something else come up, and so screw that. I'm on
for sure. Try not to be precious about any of it.
That's great.
Like if you're writing 300 songs a year, then you can't really give a shit about a single one of them.
That's an incredible output, though. I mean, that's like the shark. If you stop swimming, do you
100%. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, and how much of that? I mean, you must go back to things every now and again and go, holy shit, I totally forgot I wrote that song. That's not bad.
That happens all the time. Yeah.
Do they ever get brought out into the rotation again?
Or there'll be like some old mix file that you've forgotten about, and then you go and you tweak it a little bit and realize that there's something there that, all you need to do is fix a vocal take, and then all of a sudden it's totally fixed. And I mean, I sound like I might be contradicting what I just said, which is like, I try not to dwell on something too much. Like,
no, but every now and then something's gotta,
if there's like one little thing that you need to fix that makes it instantly better, you might as well. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying abandon anything that's not working. I just mean that like, it is really nice to open up, an old session file or something and approach it with ears that are so fresh that it feels like a new idea. Mm-hmm. That happens all the time. But wow. And then there's other things that are just like not worth even about trying to, yeah.
You mentioned touring as your job, but it also kind of feels like a mission for you in terms of being out there and doing this.
I mean, yeah, I genuinely like, I don't really know what else I was put on this earth to do. I think it's fair to say. I'm definitely most, I mean, I've had to, piece together precarious and sporadic work over the last 2 years for sure. Just kind of piecemealing, film industry jobs and shit here and there. But I mean, I definitely wouldn't consider myself particularly happy when I'm doing them, but touring is definitely, I never get tired of it. And for me, it's like the most clear-cut way to sort of be reassured that what you're doing for your living is creating art every day, because every single thing you do, from eating to sleeping to driving, whatever, is, orbits the reason for why you're there, which is, to play 45 minutes of music every night. Mm-hmm. Every single decision you make, centers around that experience. So
what's the difference between a good gig and a bad gig?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like, you sort of, the bad ones when you've had them, but having said that, I've gotten off stage, after what I think has just been like a total shit show, and then I get told by a few people that it was really great. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to have any point of reference really, but I mean, I kind of approach shows the same way I do songs, right? It's like, if you're playing 200 shows a year, it's more about like that sort of the greater body of work, and the fact that you're playing all of them, and I try to be like, really, really, egalitarian or something. Or I try not to be discriminatory in so far as putting sort of a bigger sense of importance on certain shows over others. I find that whole thing really, really kind of gross when bands will, put all their eggs in the basket of the major market show. It's like they'll give the biggest shit in the world when they're playing the Bowery Ballroom in New York City, and then maybe they don't give too much of a fuck if they're playing like Kung Fu Necktie in Philly or whatever. It's like I try to approach every single show I play with the same amount of care and desire to make it as great as it can be, no matter if it's in a town of 25 people or a town of 2 million. I don't really think about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
you find yourself mostly playing to people who know you or to people who have no clue who you are?
I mean, every year, there's more and more people at the shows, and every year, less and less of them are people you've met before.
And how do you feel about that?
Which is good. That's a sign that whatever you're doing is working, Yeah. So, but it's also like, I try to, especially in Canada, like I try to play absolutely everywhere, and I've made a point of that, and most of that is sort of like this stubbornness, I guess, this like stubborn determination. Whenever people growing up would tell me that, Canada's quote unquote impossible to tour, I just refuse to believe it. And to this day, I refuse to believe it. And I like to think that I've sort of proven otherwise, because I tour Canada all the time and I make a living doing it. So I know for a fact that what people say isn't true. Like when people try to reduce this country down to 13 markets, which is I've heard people talk about.
Right.
That is a crock of shit. That's not true. And it's really, really insulting to people that live in, smaller communities to think that way. And I never want to, why would you ever make someone who's going to pay to come and see you play that, you completely neglect their place in the world? I'm not going to do that. Like if there's a dot in a map and a word beside it, I will play a show there. And so, and I mean, I like to think that I've, been to, a good substantial amount of Canadian communities, and I don't really think of it as any other way other than my duty as an artist that's been born here,
What role do you think your music should play in the world? What do you want to
I think that, like, if there's people that really, 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 really want to see you play, that are willing to pay for it, then you have a duty to bring what you do to them. Like there's definitely a selflessness in the creation of music that me as an audience member, as someone who loves music, expects of bands that I really appreciate. Mm-hmm. And I mean, maybe it's easier for me to say that because I understand the work involved, but I guess the bottom line for me is that all the things that make touring shitty or make playing music shitty or make being a part of the music industry shitty, I could never imagine myself hating any of those things more than I love music. So for me, like my love for music and my love for touring and my love for being, creating music with other people wins every time. Mm-hmm. And that is sort of the bottom line for me. I mean, like I have to do it. I owe it to the people that want to see me play.
Yeah. I mean, you've been at this long enough now that I'm presuming at some point or another you've been approached by people going, hey, we'd like to manage you, or we'd like to put you on our label, or we'd like to do these things that can help you have a bigger presence on the scene. What's your thought on all that? Are you much happier building your own ladder as opposed to climbing the one somebody else has already built? I mean,
to be honest with you, that kind of stuff has not happened to me maybe as much as you'd think. I don't think that, like, I mean, like I'll be the first to admit it, where there's a certain level of unmarketability in what I do, insofar as
why?
I'm not a really good looking, like, 22-year-old girl with an incredible singing voice,
I know you're not going to be BTS, but this is Canada. We've got some ugly, famous, rich musicians in the country,
but
names, but
No, I mean, I've had lots of different kinds of opportunities that, some of which I've really benefited from, and some of which I've never really seen to fruition. But the DIY thing that's kind of become that's kind of consumed my reputation, I guess. Like that was definitely especially initially, that was definitely born out of a sense of sheer practicality as opposed to anything philosophical. Like,
Right.
I really, really respect, DIY and independent musicians. Don't get me wrong. I have an incredible admiration for that approach. But, me taking that approach on a personal level was more of a matter of like, okay, well, I'm going to tour and I'm going to play shows, whether or not there's someone else booking them for me or I'm doing the booking myself.
Right.
Like, to me, it was like the end goal was just so clear cut and inarguable that I just did whatever it took to make me get there.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to have had a booking agent at every step of the way that could have taken that workload off of my shoulders. I it would have been a huge luxury, but I never did. So, I just found a way to move past that pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And then, as the years go on, you realize that there is certain components of your career as a musician that, are definitely better off if you control more of them. Like it's way more work for me to manage all this stuff myself, but in doing so, I get complete 100% ownership of everything I make. And even though maybe the opportunities, of a larger payout all at once could be smaller, like maybe I don't get, the same kind of like whopping paycheck advertising or sync placements that people that are, that have a whole like crew of staff behind them. Maybe maybe those opportunities aren't as frequent for me, but when they do come, I get all of the benefits. I'm not walking away with the crumbs after I've cut everyone else in.
Right.
I get to decide every single aspect of my career. And
smaller pie, but you get it all.
Totally. It's like, exactly. Yeah. And for me, it's like, I just make sure that I'm working hard enough to maintain a decent living, but I'm not beholden to anybody. And in not being beholden to anybody, you get to maintain complete control over whatever you're doing artistically. And so I see it as being a really worthwhile way to manage my career.
And that work ethic is really the dirty little secret of it, isn't it? I mean, because
100%.
Yeah, because I've talked to so many people who go, I'd love to be a musician or this or that or the other thing, and it's like, well, yeah, that's great. I mean, you can play guitar, right, obviously, but it's all about getting up every day and working at it every day.
Carrying your amp up. Yeah, totally. Like that amp is not going to carry itself up 3 flights of stairs. And I mean, I'm not trying to say, I hope I don't making it sound like I don't have a really good team of people behind me. I have an incredible team of people behind me, and they work really hard, and I respect and admire, and I'm so grateful for everything they do.
Of course.
But, in comparison to other bands that rely on a way more affluent production, I mean, I have like, I'm on a team of like 4 or 5 people. There's bands that have a staff of 22. Mm-hmm. I mean, like it's still so small. It's still such a cottage industry level thing that it's like, in comparison, it's totally DIY.
Yeah.
But
I've dealt with Metallica. They have a staff of 50 who have their own staff of 50,
Totally.
Rings and rings and rings and rings to get,
exactly. So, I mean, like I'm, there's cosmic differences between me and that level of production. Like,
and I don't think it makes the music any better, It
totally doesn't make the music any better. And I mean, I just, as a listener, I really respect artists where you can hear the effort and the work ethic they put into what they do in the records. I like hearing the sweat and the blood and the discomfort and the struggle, and like I love all that shit because I relate to it. Like I want to put on a punk rock record that sounds like there was some pain involved. So
what are you listening to these days?
I love I listen to a lot of ambient stuff now. I mean, it's like when you've been touring as much as I have, and when you've made as many records, you get to this point in your life where you realize that you can't really listen to music without studying it. You're just so like, if someone plays you something that you do actually really engage with and fall in love with,
you start putting a butterfly under the microscope and trying to figure out why.
Yeah, 100%. And so you end up like, you get to the point where you're so obsessed with what it is that, makes this music so good that you can't even hear the song anymore. Mm-hmm. And so when I listen to like Alice Coltrane or Hiroshi Yoshimura or Stars of the Lid or Brian Eno or, some free jazz like Cecil Taylor and shit like that, it's so nice to be almost like distracted from the act of actually like dialing into what it is that makes you love something. And that music, I can just let it sort of be. And I put it on and I do my thing and I'm like fucking cleaning my house or whatever the fuck. And it's just like, it's so nice to just be enveloped in music in a way that's not totally, like scientific or something. And it's like,
going to make an ambient album. Is that
coming? Well, I try to incorporate aspects of it into songs, but I mean, like, having said that, like, I don't think that I have the attention span to like create that kind of music. Like I'm still like a very much like, 3.5 minutes is a perfect song for me in terms of what I want to do.
ADD guy.
Pretty much. And, but I mean, when it comes to like being like a lover of music, that's totally where I'm at these days. It's like stuff that I don't really have to pay attention to. And I mean that in the best possible way. I mean that in the best possible.
Have you ever listened to those old Fripp albums? When
yeah, like
2 tape decks.
Love that stuff. And like William Basinski and Arvo Part. They're reissuing the Ryuichi Sakamoto Alvanoto records this year on vinyl. Like all that stuff. I'm obsessed with it. And I listen to like very little, screaming punk rock anymore. And despite the fact I love that kind of music, but it's like, it's a very, very, very small piece of the pie. That's stuff that that still resonates with me.
Yeah. So what's next? Are you going to be able to get back out on the road? I know you've got some shows booked. Are they still?
Yeah, I mean,
what's going on?
It's been crazy. I mean, like, as of March 2nd, that's, as of right now, going to be my first show back. That could change at any minute. But the release tour is supposed to start March 2nd in Calgary, and then that'll be going straight through, playing pretty much every day. Like there's about 48 shows on the books now, and that's going to be right to the end of May. And that includes like continental Europe, Western Canada a couple times, some Ontario shows, and then that'll take us into the summer, which is hopefully going to be Canadian festival season. And then back to Europe and hopefully Japan in the fall.
Wow.
So
and so this will be what configuration? You and the rhythm section, or?
Yeah, I mean, now that the record's out, it's going to mostly be the full band. Yeah, just so we can properly play the songs in the way that they are on the record or whatever. But having said that, I mean, there's always solo touring in between all that stuff that's dependent on budget and where it is I'm going and who's available. And so I try to let all that stuff sort of dictate the art a little bit. And almost in like growing up, I was a huge Minutemen fan, and they had that, the Jan McConnell philosophy. And it's like, I remember hearing this story. I don't know what record it was. It might have been, I think it was before Double Nickels on the Dime, but they would, I remember them talking about playing their songs faster so they could fit them all on one reel of tape.
Right.
And that idea just blew my mind and continues to, because it's just like, it's amazing that a band would, take financial and technological and social restrictions and let all those things influence their art. To me, that's not any kind of downgrade. That's like a really, really commendable and creative and skillful and courageous way of dealing with logistical problems. It's like, to me, that's like such an incredibly fascinating component in the creation of that music is the limitations that they had. Mm-hmm. So I try to embrace that kind of stuff, because I think that if you're willing to think of it that way, you can almost use those limitations as another instrument, you know?
Yeah, well, it's the box, right? And in a way, the box is freeing.
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, like, yeah, how, you know, how much money you've got affects your guitar tone in the same way that an effects pedal does. You know, they're like how what amp you can afford to buy and how willing you are to explore the tonal settings in it is crucial to how you become as a guitar player.
Well, and then whatever you're producing in that moment is honest, right? As opposed to
Sure.
going out and recreating the same song and the same set and the same show like an act over and over and over. So you're again,
Exactly.
it's all about just living in the moment and capturing the creation and creating something real. That's
Yeah.
sort of your whole MO. If I'm
And you know, embracing the reality that music's not just about sound. You know, there's a whole other component to it that is, you know, undetectable, but is totally critical in everything that you're hearing.
So how do you work with that? That seems like something that you can't get your hands on to manipulate or capture or even quite grasp, you know?
You just have to just be like the opposite of a control freak and you know, think of yourself as a conduit or a lightning rod or whatever to something that's bigger and better and more important and way more beautiful than you are, you know, and just submit and acquiesce to it. And, you know, on almost in like I'm a pretty hardcore atheist, but like almost in a like a religious level, you know, like where, you know, when you plug a guitar into an amp and you turn that thing on and you play a chord and it shakes a picture off the wall, you know, that's not you doing that anymore. You've put the necessary actions in place to create a domino effect that exists outside of your body and it's outside of your life and outside of every human being that's in witness to it. Maybe some people find that uncomfortable, but I actually think it's a really incredible thing, and it's a really good way of measuring the power and impact that music can have, because it has an undeniable effect on the world. Mm-hmm. You know,
have you ever written this stuff down?
Not really, but I mean, I definitely talk about it with a lot of people. You know, I mean, we like music theory is a huge part of being a musician. But I mean, again, it's like people think that all of that has, you know, like that term doesn't describe anything other than, you know, intervals between notes or the sound of things, or like, you know, what kind of notes are in a scale or whatever. I mean, all that stuff's totally important, but there's a textural component and a philosophical component to music that is just as critical into its creation, you know?
Right. No, it's like Miles Davis used to say, it's
totally.
Not just the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play.
Absolutely. And like space and silence is a sound, you know, like when you've got a room mic on a drum kit and there's one huge snare hit that's resonating throughout a big studio space, like that, all of that is as important as the drummer hitting it, the initial note, right? Sure. So
context, I mean, setting, everything, yeah,
everything. You can think about all of that as metaphorically or as literally as you want to, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, whenever I record, I try to be pretty aware of all that stuff.
Of course, even Miles had his limits. There's that famous story about when Coltrane was in the band and Coltrane was soloing for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes.
Totally.
And you know, Miles said, why are you playing so long? And he said, oh, I don't know how to stop. And he said, take the fucking horn out your mouth.
Take the horn out of your mouth. Yeah. It's a great quote. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Totally.
So are you working on another book? I think a lot of people who love you for music, maybe they don't even know that you've written 2 novels as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's always something sort of in the, like, you know, there's always something cooking in that regard. There's like, if you've got a manuscript full of notes and you haven't looked at it for 5 months, but it's sitting on the fucking kitchen table taunting you, you're working on a book. Yeah. Like if it's nagging at you and you're thinking about it, you're writing, you know. And yeah, I mean, I've definitely started something that I'm still not sure how it's going to end, but there's always something going for sure.
And what else? I mean, what's next? Ballet?
No, that's definitely out of my wheelhouse. I'm not going to be on the cover of Vogue anytime soon. No, I mean, between recording my own music, touring, recording other people's music, and writing books, I can maintain a pretty good living, and I'm pretty happy doing that. You know, I make no claim to be good at any other art forms other than writing music and writing books. I've tried to make my own music videos. I've failed miserably. I always get other people to do it because I completely acknowledge that those are art forms that I just do not understand. And you know, I'm going to continue doing what I've devoted my life to, you know.